Hello. Thanks, John, and thank you for everything you've done to put this together. And thank you, Mary and Betsy. I mean, we're basically going to get right into it because I don't think too many people hear in an introduction. But I will just say that to be able to sit up here and speak with you two women who inspire me on all the levels and all the ways as human beings, as sober women, as writers who build yourselves and the world and the kind of great fucked up interiors of how we live and love and hurt and rebuild each other. Like, you make those worlds and those complexities on the page in ways that just blow my mind. So to get here and sit and talk to you both about how we do what we do, how we, turn our lives into art, which can make you kind of throw up in your mouth to say, but honestly, at the end of the day, this is what we do, right? We make art and we are using the materials of what we've lived to do it, which everybody does in some way, implicit or explicit, but we really use the materials of what we've lived. And what I want to talk about is how recovery shapes the way you guys do that, how recovery shapes the ways that you build yourself as a character on the page, how recovery shapes the ways that you think about, rigorously sort of go back and analyze and reanalyze experience, how recovery shapes the way you confront ego, fear, desire, anxiety when it comes to writing. Because I think those are questions that in a way I have a million things to say about myself, but also have never quite been asked directly in those terms, so I'm excited to ask those questions here. And I thought I would start big, which is by saying to both of you, kind of like, how does recovery shape the way that you write about your lives? And you can take that question wherever you want to, because I think it can go a lot of really fascinating places.
Oh, shit. I'm so excited because there are so many people here that I'm in an online group with, and to have us all gather when we've been remote is very thrilling. And just to see so many great writers, Joy Priest, Kava, Aaron, Chase, is just, and not to mention these two hoe bags. I think the big thing that recovery has done for me is that I'm not dead. And that when you're not dead, you can write. And as a dead person, I would produce way less. I have one of my favorite people. I've actually known him since he was 12 because he grew up in my sister's house. Is here tonight. And we were speaking last night about a book he's working on about his own family, which I started trying to get him to write when he was in graduate school with me, but he wouldn't listen to me. And do you mind if I say something about what you said, Chris? Because he said, I think I was too hard on my parents in this first draft, and sort of set them up as straw men to be assholes. They were assholes, Chris. I knew your parent. Not an uncommon opinion. And your brother Jonathan is a malignant sociopath, but not that anybody asked, but he said, I remember all these cozy, middle-class, bougie things that we did as a family in Houston where I grew up, that I was just kind of mocking as like I was Baudelaire or something, and I was like too cool to like this shit. But that he really did have a lot of safeness and secureness in this. And so I think for myself, just looking back, I'm writing a book about my sister, and for a year, who died and whom I wasn't speaking to for 7 years before she died. And it's one of the most agonizing things I've ever done, maybe the most agonizing. And for a year, I couldn't stop prosecuting her. I mean, I felt like I needed a laser pointer and a jury. Ladies and gentlemen, is this not 100% our fault? And literally for a year, I did that. And it was just grinding the way resentment, which people who've gotten sober were, when you resentment from resentary to refeel. And then why was I crying my guts out? And why am I reading the letters she wrote me in college every letter starting when I was 17 years old that I got, and I was a person of very little talent. And she would write, Mary Karr, famous writer. When nobody believed in me, my sister believed in me. And when I was a child, she saved my life and developed what felt like a homicidal rage that I still don't understand. But that I was not, I'm responsible. So I think, that anytime I'm prosecuting, even though I'm still writing, even though you spend a year just writing, like all the horrible shit she did and setting her straight, I knew that none of the pages I accumulated were going to ever be in a book. So I felt, you feel like you're spinning your wheels. But at the end of that, I had a moment where I looked at an online video of her. And when the camera turned on her, she was about 35, younger than our sons are now. And she turned and looked at the camera, and she put her hands like this, like a girl popping out of a cake. And I saw her see me. I mean, I saw her see me from the other side. And it was so shocking that I had not seen and felt her, because I'd been protecting myself from the deep love and the tragedy we made of our sisterhood. So I think, and having women and men, Kaba Akbar, just have these people in this community who are doing their own personal inventories nonstop and who are trying to develop a spiritual way of living, which I don't want to do, but I would like to be less of an asshole. And I'd also like to not drink myself to death or biggies and heroin. Thank you very much, Thea.
There's so much, as there always is, in what you say and how you make me see my own life differently. But, two things that just went straight into my bones from what you said. And one is, I can remember you coming to speak to my students a few years ago in a Zoom class, and you spoke about the importance in writing of allowing memory to disrupt the stories that you told yourself about your own experience. And I think you gave an example of kind of writing your father in a more complex way and remembering certain moments of kindness that, we all do this, right? Like, we all tell ourselves a certain story about a person, a relationship, an experience. That person wronged me. That place was a place where I was unhappy. Or even the ways that kind of self-laceration can become its own oversimplified story. I was so horrible. I broke all those hearts, whatever. Like, ego takes 1,000 different disguises as its masquerades. But the way that part of the work of recovery, I think, for me, has involved like peeling away the hardened crust of all those oversimplified stories I tell myself about my own ways of moving through the world, about other people, about the ways people have wronged me, about the ways life has wronged me, etc. And finding something more complex and truer, finding the ways that people I've told myself were harsh were, yes, and...
There's the woman who just wrote a book about divorce.
Well, you also said something about writing about divorce, actually, that really shaped the entire way I wrote that book, which is like, you don't write the heartbreak of divorce by writing what was hard about the divorce. You write the heartbreak of divorce by writing the love that was there. And I think, to me, that's also connected to what you were saying about sort of trying to access those tender places underneath all the ways our egos defend and guard us, right? Accessing, like, underneath the prosecution self that's like litigating, you did this, you did that, it's all her fault. There is always a grieving, vulnerable, bewildered, scared self, you name it, but there's always something like soft and tender and unprotected underneath all the protections that the ego puts up. And I think for me, trying to tell truer stories about divorce or motherhood or being dumped or having parents or whatever it is we're trying to tell stories about is like trying to access that tender place that all of our narratives are trying to protect, and to somehow try to find a way of speaking from that place instead.
Not that really, both of those last things that you said, like the two of you said, that really ties into like what I think about how recovery connects to my writing. I mean, it's, because I've been writing since I was a kid, and I always knew that I could write. I also somehow in my drinking years also knew that I didn't really have anything to say. Like that I was just like, I don't know anything. Like I was constantly like, I just can't, like, I don't know what matters about what I'm doing. So I just kept writing, whatever. I got sober. But when I think about it now, like I really think about like it's so connected, because the work that we do in recovery is about these things that you're talking about. It's about looking at ourselves, whatever story we're trying to put on the page. Like, it's so much about, like, yeah, I wrote a book about my marriage falling apart as well, but I didn't, like, I kept, like, this is actually really funny to me. As I would have people read it, and even when it went to my editor, I kept waiting for someone to tell me, like, dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper. Like, that's not, like, that, like, because I wasn't sure what had happened even in my marriage, really. And so I had been doing that all along in the work, and nobody ever said that to me. But I still kind of felt like, yeah, but I haven't gotten to the answer yet. I'm still like, it's so much about asking questions. And I think asking questions is one of those things that we have, it's fundamental to how we stay sober,
Also, I want to say what you were talking about tenderness, that we imagine, especially in memoir, like the more, jackpots there are, and then, my best friend since I was 15 is here today, Dooney. And Dooney was just talking about our friend Jacqueline and being thrown off a guy's balcony from the second floor and surviving, oddly. But there's the jackpots, that's what film favors. That's what cinema favors, the spectacle. But what memoir can do that film cannot do, and that novels sometimes aren't bothering to do because they're in such a pissing contest with movies, is trying to make it be, as sort of like everything everywhere. And instead, the tenderness, the small tenderness of me seeing my sister's face and feeling her. Nothing was happening. I was in my apartment, I pressed a play button, that's what happened. And that's what opens the book, and that's what everybody who read it said, this is one of the best moments in the book. And that was when I knew I had started after a year of prosecuting. But the tenderness, we think of it as being like, oh, it's too sappy, I can't write that. It's loving people that makes us get up in the morning. It also makes you want to kill the people you love.
First of all, I just want to say, I have some things to say about what both of you guys just said, but I want to say, Mary, you just know the best named people. You're just dropping like jack-o'-lantern, I just feel like somehow it's like the people in my life are named like Dean. It's literally my dad's name. I'm just like, if I could just have just one friend named Jack.
Danny.
Dooney, so good. I do get to be in a room with him though, which is always a treat. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a way also that even talking about being in community, like being in community with people who ask questions, or being in a community of writers and friends who also read drafts and offer feedback. Like, to me, the whole process of offering a draft to a reader who I respect, whether they're my editor or my friend or my ex or whoever it is, is like so akin to the way in recovery that part of what we do is outsource judgment to the people we respect in our lives, to say, look, part of how I'm not just going to live on the power of my own willpower, which has gotten me a lot of places, and not all of them are good, you know? So it's like to be like, what do you think about, well, how should I handle this? Or just like having humility and just getting the input of others feels liberating and sustaining, if sometimes also difficult, because the truth of other people and what's valuable about other people is they actually don't always tell you the thing that you want to hear in that moment, you know? And it's really the same with offering up drafts. So like when I give you a draft of my book to read and you tell me what you tell me about writing more deeply into love, it's like that is where those places come from, the kind of tender, quiet places that you just...
It's also emotional stakes. There's risk. You know, throwing jack-o'-lantern off a balcony was just another day in his life. Danny shot at him once, didn't hit him, but shot adjacent to him. But he was threatening him, and I wouldn't want to be threatened by Jack.
It was super important to me that my love for my ex was a part of the story, you know? Like that.
It's really so beautifully there.
And people still telling me like, yeah, you did the right thing. But it was really, it because it's not about, you know, it's not about him doing something that hurt me. That's part of the story, but it's about an excavation. It's about examining things closely on a deeper level, you know, and getting to the emotional core of these experiences, you know, and yeah.
There's a moment in your book that I actually wanted to ask you about, and I think it unfolds into a question for both of you. But as you know, one of my favorite parts of your book is called, I always remember it, she brought a big fish. The big fish. And do you mind if I...
No, that's fine.
I hope I don't paraphrase it wrong, but basically...
Prove it.
There's no way this could be improved. Sometimes as nonfiction writers, you take what the world serves and you say, I literally could not make this any better than it already is. So a woman comes over to a movie night that you and your husband are hosting, and like the kinds of snacks one might intuitively bring to a movie night include things like popcorn or candy. Anyway, she brings a whole fucking roasted fish on a platter.
Well, yard long.
It's the first bigger and bigger. Yeah. In my mind now, it's like 3 feet long. Anyway, this is the first sign that something is not as it should be. And anyway, there's infidelity and the end of a marriage, and you're not the one who's at fault.
If I get, and the fish was the tip-off.
The fish was the tip-off. Yeah. But at the moment of that, at the end of that section, part of what I think is beautiful about how you craft that night on the page is that you talk about watching your ex-husband walk her to her car, and you talk about sort of being at the window and watching hawkishly and being like, I did not think of myself as a person who watches hawkishly. And of course, as a reader, I'm like, watching hawkishly. I find that phrase really hard to say correctly, but of course you're watching hawkishly because she bought a huge fucking fish. I'm like, what is going on? But you say, you know, there was a part of yourself that you experienced in that moment, and an experience of jealousy that did not feel, it wasn't a part of yourself that you enjoyed. It wasn't a part of yourself that you were proud of, but there it was, and it was forceful and it was loud. Right. And you give us the gift as readers of letting that part of yourself onto the page, the part of yourself that in a way you can't stand. And I wanted to talk about what that process looks like for you, bringing those parts of yourself that are difficult or uncomfortable, or that some part of the ego wants to push into the margins, kind of how you bring them onto the page, and maybe what role recovery plays and how you reckon with them.
That's such a good, hard question. I mean, I'm trying to think about like that particular thing. I think, you know, it was a weird situation with this book, because I really was kind of writing it in real time. Like I was just like, well, I got nothing else to do right now. I can't think about anything else. I'm just going to write all this shit and put it away. And so I was just like, thinking about all these moments, like things that I may have missed, you know, like a person who goes to the door to watch her husband walk someone to the car, like somewhere in there I knew, and like there's a couple of mentions of this other person in the book, but it's not about that. It's about me, and how I responded and reacted to all this. And so I actually cut, let's share with everyone here. I cut a chapter out called Bitch.
Isn't it fucking bitch at the beginning?
No, it was always just bitch. It was just bitch. But I cut that, and that was actually good. It was a funny piece.
I would pay good money to read that chapter.
I'll just tell you that. Send it to anyone who wants to read it.
We'll start a GoFundMe page.
But that's not, because I was angry, right? And I was like, I thought, okay, I'm allowed to be angry. That's a legitimate thing. I think you could get from a piece like that it's still about me, but it was me, right, in the end. And it was not it just it wasn't really part of the story that I was trying to tell, which is not about her, there were a lot of specifics in that section that were about her that were really mean.
Everything you're saying is both completely eloquent and insightful, and also making me want to read it. How do you think about that? I mean, what does that process look like for you, Mary, of bringing those parts of yourself, the parts of yourself that are uncomfortable, or that you have an aversion to, or that you can feel some part of you wanting to leave it out, but the part of you that wants to tell a truer story wants to bring it in?
Yeah, I mean, I liked what you said before, that if you're really a good alcoholic, you understand depression, and to flagellate yourself, to cudgel yourself, and think what an awful, horrible, how bad I am or was, is such a glamorous temptation. And Toby Wolf said it to me. He said, you don't want to, confess the lesser sin to hide the greater. Or there's a scene, we talked about this, there's a scene that you don't tell in scene where you're being the asshole. When she's being the asshole, you write the whole scene in great detail so everybody's in the room. When you're being an asshole, it's 2 sentences.
I know I've told you some version of the story, but my editor, who is a brilliant and lovely man, and also somebody who I have a friendship with, which I think was really, it's not always necessary, but it felt like an important part of working on this particular book, my most recent book with him. But when he read an early draft of this book, which is about a lot of things, early motherhood, but it's also about the end of a marriage, he said, I want to talk to you about the word harm, specifically the word harm, because he said, you're very specific about dramatizing certain moments where you are wronged by your ex. And then at other moments, this word harm shows up. You say, I was so aware of all the harm I had done. I was so aware of all the harm I had caused him. I felt so aware of my harm that I felt like a frightened deer in the middle of the field or whatever, and he was like, you're really specific when you talk about the things he did to you, and you're really abstract when you talk about the things you did to him. And it was, part of why I said it's important that we have a friendship is I think, if I'm hearing that from just a random Hachette email address or whatever, I think I'd be like, fuck you, I some stuff happened to me. But because I both respect him and I know he cares about me, and I know he really is ultimately where he's speaking from is knowing that there is a better version of the truth that I'm capable of speaking, and that better version of the truth lies beyond the door that has the word harm written on it. And he was right, because there's a kind of interrogation that happens, I think, when you look, both for me, it's so connected to craft, because it really is about looking at those moments where the language becomes imprecise and thinking, what am I afraid of? Like, what am I afraid of? Even when I describe this book, when I've described it to people, I used to say, I used to call it a book about love and rupture. And finally, my partner, God bless him, who's not a writer, was like, it seemed to me like your book was about divorce, but you're always saying it's a book about rupture. Why are you using that word? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like,
More French sounding.
yeah, it sounds really elegant. Rupture sounds like a literary thing that literary people talk about, so anyway, to see you kind of in those moments where it's both like getting called out on stuff, but getting called out in the most loving way. That's like, I know there's something deeper down in you that wants to say maybe a different thing.
Yeah, I always go back to, it's not out there, so but I, like, in reading your book, I thought, the stuff about, sorry about that, friends, the motherhood, like the aspects of motherhood, and like, what interested me so much was what you kind of, how deep you went with that, but also how that kind of, the connection with your child, like, you like the way that you looked at that so closely, and what I learned about you from these really like a personal, you're talking about your child, like, it's very primal, right? And I don't have children, but I just felt like reading it, I just felt like she's really showing us just, not just, it's not a mommy book, like where, like that kind of thing. Like it's next level looking into who you are, with the stories that come through, having this child and leaving marriage.
Well, I think, thank you. And, there's a way that what you were just saying too reminded me of what you said a few beats ago, Mary, about how there can be a way of thinking about tenderness or having an anxiety about tenderness on the page that thinks about it as like, oh, it's going to be something sappy, and I think,
right.
of course, in writing about any kind of love, especially parenting, I think there can be a fear of the sappiness of it. And I think so often sappiness comes from,
It's the opposite of what is on the page.
because sappiness comes, I think, when we're afraid to tell the truth and are telling instead of a sort of sanitized version of experience that does not make room for the jealous gaze at the window, that does not make room for, the 1,000 moments when you're with a young child and you're like, I need so always,
Yeah, can she fit in the microwave? You said, I may turn it on, but if I could get her in there for just a minute. I have 2 grandchildren. And anybody who doesn't get that joke, it has never babysat. Right. And I think, I think I became such good friends with you. I mean, we became friends going to meetings and so forth. But I think that piece she wrote about COVID, I don't know if anybody read her piece about COVID when let me tell you something. She did not say enough bad about what she was living. I brought her some pasta. At one point, I read that thing. I was like, oh my God, I barely know this one. I have to bring her some pasta. She's just like, she was in one room with a toddler. Run back and forth toddler, like an idiot, a complete nitwit of a human being with all the energy in the world and can't speak English and is unemployed and can't get anything or take the trash out. And you were in there and you were just like, oh my God.
too big to fit in a microwave. I mean, it's fucking ridiculous.
No, but that the claustrophobia of being stuck in that and not sentimentalizing it. And I've rarely felt so bad for somebody in my life as I did for you in that house. It was an apartment about yay big. The whole thing was about this big. And she was in there newly single with COVID with a stupid baby.
Do you describe toddlers as like little drunks or something, which is that old song? Yeah.
Yeah, if I treat my grandchildren like drunk girls who are like, no, I don't want to do that. You know, I want to have me on that. I want some candy now. You know, it's like you're like a drunk girl at the bar. Like, you know, I'm seeing this behavior before in myself, so my heart goes out to you. But
there's something you were saying earlier to Mary about self-deprecation, or a particular kind of self-deprecation that I wanted to ask both of you about, because I think it's so true that, you know, when you're saying Toby Wolf told you, you know, don't use the confession of the lesser sin to hide the greater sin. And sometimes I think that, yeah, confessing one thing can be a way of looking away from the thing we're really scared to look at. And I also think, for me at least, sometimes writing about my own experience in a way that is rushing to indict myself at every turn is also ultimately a form of manipulation, because I'm sort of like, oh, you're not going to be able to think anything bad about me because I'm going to say the bad thing about me before you can even think it. And so I'm sort of going to manage your experience of the text, your relationship to me as a character, and I'm going to kind of like preemptively,
it's not a bad idea to admit shitty things about yourself that you know the reader knows. It's not a bad thing to admit that stuff.
But I think it's a hard balance to strike too, like of that like accountability that we want to put on the page, but not blaming ourselves entirely, you know, for whatever, you know?
Well, and that's really what I was going to ask you guys is like, how do you sort of listen or sense or suss out when you're writing the difference between a kind of self-interrogation that is taking accountability or really trying to look in a clear-eyed way at what you've done and how you've done it versus the kinds of self-deprecation or self-interrogation that are sort of deflecting or managing or still somehow not fully looking at the thing? What does it feel like to tell the difference between those modes?
Well, I mean, it helps me a lot. Readers help me a lot with that, you know, because I don't always know. You know, and I, you know, where marriage ends, right? Like, I mean, I certainly spent a lot of time thinking, what is he thinking? What was he thinking? What was he thinking? But in the end, like, I can't do anything about that. I can't control, it's over. I have to like, okay, I just wanted to sort through everything. And, you know, I did it on the page because I didn't, like, that's what I do, you know? So all those things were things that were like, I was constantly kind of like, was it this? Was it this? Was it this? You know, each one of those is like a chapter, you know, basically like,
the L-shaped couch.
Yeah. Like, was it this? We got a king size bed. Was it the king size bed? Or, you know, in the end, I think it's a lot about a failure to communicate, right? And that is a lot of on my side of the street, right? And that's, but you know, these, like, if I don't have other people, especially people who know, you know, a variety of people, but like people who know me and were there or are good readers or whatever, people I trust, you know, to give me some feedback, like, you're taking way too much responsibility or you missed something, you know?
Yeah. I do think it's good, though, if they know, if you're being an asshole, to say that you know it. I don't think it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
In general, I think you have to go where for me, I try to go where the reader is. Because that's kind of the experience is for. It's not, the book isn't for me. It's, you know, it's a bomb that doesn't detonate until somebody reads it. And if I can't get them to read because I'm being so boring, which I mostly am, I'm very sad. The End by Mary Karr. Every book I've written started like that. And then I got more specific about it, maybe. So I just think the whole thing, there's not enough that can be said about how terrifying it is. That just the fear of being looked at, of being exposed. And for me, it takes me a year to get past that. I mean, it takes me a year of just literally writing and like flinging the pages. I mean, I literally have stacks of pages I just threw away because they're totally worthless. And somebody said, I'd really like to read those. I said, no, actually you wouldn't. And I remember giving my editor, at one point, who's edited everything I've written, Courtney Hodel, giving her like 130 pages. And then we were having lunch at my house to talk about it, and she literally just handed it back unmarked and said, not this. I said, okay, alrighty then. Okay. And she didn't have to be more specific because in a way, it had felt so leaden to me and felt so much like I was pushing a rock and like I was, you're behind the car and you're in the mud and you're all drunk and you can't get moving. And that is what it had felt like for a year. So I just think if you're writing and that is happening to you, that I always say to my students, stuff is standing in line to be written. And when you get past it is when the other stuff comes. So you feel like if you're not accumulating pages, but if you've done a couple of these, you realize that you're just going to write a lot of stuff that is not worth having anybody reading, but it's done something to you psychologically and internally. So most of what I write is really bad. I just don't publish that part. Yeah. So, I mean, I think, and I just cut and cut and cut anything that can be cut. Not it's a clever paragraph. No. Does it advance the story I'm telling about me and my sister, or am I wasting time? Because I don't want to get back in the room with the bear. I don't want to get back in there.
I had an experience like you were talking about with the harm thing that came to mind too about when I was talking with my editor, and shout out to editors for what, man, and he was saying like, okay, what is the story you want to tell? What is this chapter about? What is this, so I told him, and he was like, that's not on the page. And I was like, yes, it is. It's over here. And he's like, one sentence.
That's a sentence.
You wrote a sentence.
You wrote one sentence.
Yeah. And so he's like, write a chapter about that. And I did, and it was brutal. Came out really good, but it was brutal to write. But I did what you were talking about, which is like, okay, what's the harm? What is it? What happened? What happened, Betsy?
But I also think, and I just have to talk about this, about the spiritual practices that we develop in recovery. And are we having a Q&A? Okay, I just double check. But the spiritual practices, for me, I get up in the morning, I don't read the paper, I've been meditating for like 35 years and just in the past 15 months have found a new method that begins with this breathing that has totally changed my meditative life. So I meditate for maybe 30 minutes and then I read, not the newspaper. I'm not allowed on social media. I'm not allowed on Facebook. I'm not allowed at any of that stuff. But to get my mind, and I just read something better than I could write. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be history, nonfiction, poetry, anything. I was reading you last week, Joy Priest. But like, why can't I write poems like this? Believing that, I mean, when I first got sober, I was like the most atheist of all atheists, from a family of atheists that like mocked and made fun of. We lived in the, East Texas, and people like walked around our yards because we didn't go to church. I mean, it was frowned on. And but to develop a place in your body south of your neck where there's something not you, where there's a Geiger counter that's either going tick, 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 that's where the rich stuff is. And I think having that space in your body and just realizing that some days are going to be really hard, that more days are going to be really hard than good. So, I mean, you think of a batting average, a great batting average is what, 3 what? Somebody, there are men in here.
You got the wrong panel.
Yeah, you got to my batting average is so much lower than 30%. It's not even funny. But that process, but for me, the meditation, and when I don't know what to do, I don't go on social media. I make a cup of tea and I make myself stay in the silence, stay in that quiet. Even if I just walk out and walk around the block, with ear things and not listening to anything, and sort of forcing myself to stay in the silence and letting that stuff come up. The practice of that, things like that. And so I'd like to hear from you guys about I'm a big hot bath person at the end of the night with candles and the whole,
But my mornings are very much like that too. Like an hour and a half in the morning of like meditation. I keep a journal and I read. I love that you said better, something better than I can.
Nothing better than I can ever write.
It has been like feeding my soul to like quiet, nothing's on. I don't look at email or anything until like after I get home from walking the dog, So it's like I'm up for 2 hours doing all that stuff. It's amazing.
I don't do anything till I'm done writing.
Fundamental.
I can't do it till I'm done writing. And even if it means, if I write for 6 hours, I'm probably writing for 3. Because I just get stuck, and especially if you're not editing, if you're going from ground zero, if you do a page, 2 pages a day, good for you. That's a baller rate.
Well, and I think on the process front, there's so much that I identify with, even if there are also my particular mornings are higher on the peanut butter and jelly.
You haven't shaved off your legs in years. Same day.
But but yeah, certainly the sense of like cultivating a relationship to the not you as a part of spiritual practice and recovery, certainly. And one of the things that I've loved about the capaciousness of spirituality, at least in the recovery communities that I've been a part of, is this idea of like, God doesn't have to be a man with a beard in the sky. God doesn't even have to be God. Just something that is not you, whether that's other people in a room, whether that's, a tree growing from an acorn, like my first sponsor always used to say, whether it's the things that somebody else wrote that you never could have written, like all of these, I think, cultivate exactly like you're describing, that space of the not you in the self that is ultimately feels like oxygen and fuel and a kind of making the self small that also permits the voice to speak. Yeah, it was just like the weirdness of recovery, that way that a certain kind of self-diminishment actually feels so enlarging and enlivening. And I think part of the particular conundrum of like making art in recovery, which is like the self getting small in order for the self to find what it is that it has to say and how it wants to say.
Make big money. The self can make big money.
And you know what, like that,
Check.
Wouldn't we all? It's so interesting to me, like as like my life, about like the spiritual practice of reading in the morning, because I used to always read something that was like empirically spiritually based or whatever, whatever that means. And then I sort of started slow, like I would read poetry in the morning, and then I started reading fiction, like putting fiction into the mix. And those things could be about any subject under the sun, but it still feels like it does feel like part of a spiritual practice, like it does go in here as much as, whatever kind of, yeah, no less than like something that's like directly talking about God,
I want to ask one more question and then we'll turn it over because I'm sure there are lots of questions in the room. And this question is really connected to what we've just been talking about. And it's a question about gratitude. And it's, I think, also connected to that idea that you mentioned earlier about the kind of fear of tenderness as something sappy. And I'll just generalize for myself that I think I have had a fear of writing all kinds of positive states. I've had a fear of writing happiness. I've had a fear of writing love. I've had a fear of writing intimacy of all kinds because I've been afraid that writing, that happiness writes white or whatever, there are 1,000 ways to say it, that there's something kind of bland and inherently euphemistic and cliched about writing happiness. And there was a thing that you told me years ago about gratitude and your own practice of gratitude that, forgive me if I paraphrase it wrong, but it changed my life, so I want the wrongly paraphrased version, even if it is wrong. But just looking to gratitude not as like a set of abstract categories where you're sort of like being a good student in class and being like, I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my health, yeah. And because that kind of gratitude had always felt false to me, and like I just hated myself for not being more grateful, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I'm really grateful to be alive.
Yeah.
I've always been alive, so I don't know any better.
Not grateful for my kids.
So what do I know?
You were like, instead, what if you could be grateful for particular kind of visceral and specific moments? The moment of kind of feeling that light rain start to fall right when your daughter is like sleeping in her carrier next to your heart, or just to get really sharp and specific, or the moment when you like laugh so hard at something your friend said that you literally felt like your C-section scar was going to split open, but it was totally worth it, like to ground gratitude in those particular visceral moments. And I wonder how that sense of specificity in relation to gratitude has maybe for you as the sort of like sage of that wisdom, whether you feel like it's operative and how you try to write the goodness and the joy.
Well, I stole it from St. Ignatius. It's not my idea, but I'd love to be responsible. But the idea is, instead of I always make gratitude lists, and I realized that making a list, I was making lists for stuff I was afraid God would take away if I did not fawn and flatter God and say, thank you that my son, wasn't hit by a red ball truck today, or whatever horrible thing that I imagine is going to happen every day, every second. And the word Ignatius uses in the spiritual exercises is to sober. And the way he says it, and it's daily, it's an evening exercise, and you press play like you're looking at a video thing. You think, I open my eyes, when I went in there, I got some coffee, and you try to be in your body in those moments, that God is in the body. And so sometimes it's just like, what a donut, Sometimes it's pleasure, it's actual physical pleasure. Sometimes it's me and my friend Dooney laughing ourselves sick today, talking about the adventures of everybody we know who went to jail. And that we didn't go to jail as a miracle, but just the joy, the dinner I had last night with Chris and Joy, my friend Judith Thurman, and those moments but where you picture, what was I wearing? What can I smell? You go through all your senses. What can I smell? What can I taste? What am I feeling physically? What can I hear? What can I see? And you try to bring yourself back in the moment and really savor is the word he uses, like it's food, but savor that moment as a bodily experience. And I think what it's done is it's also makes your memory better because you're grounded in the, memories in the body from coming into the rivers of the senses. And I think, but it also made me, like I always complained, as all professors complain about doing. And the idea is, where do you see God during the day? And so all professors complain about how many office hours they have to have because we should be writing or borrowing books. But I realized from doing that exercise just for about a month that I saw God almost every time I met one-on-one with a student. And so I doubled my office hours, and now I just will meet with anybody stupid enough to come. And I do like sometimes 2 or 3 times the number of office hours of a normal person. But I often find that that's where God is in my day, is sitting looking at another human being, usually one smart and sensitive, with some degree of, curiosity and drive and language. It's one of the most beautiful things I can do. So I've really changed how I live my life, because I'm making decisions about what I eat and who I associate with. And it's like, why do I have to keep having lunch with that woman? I hate her. Like, I don't ever have to have lunch with her again. I can make this decision now. It's twice a year. It's not that big a deal. But you know what? I don't like her.
Looking at all my beautiful students who are here in the audience and thinking, don't show up to my office hours unless you identify as God. But I want to see God in my office hours. But I could not agree more with that sentiment, that it's part of what is so beautiful and necessary about teaching in my life. Not that I just do it because it's necessary for me, but that genuine encounter with something that feels truly divine and awe-inspiring in other people struggling with exactly the same stuff that I'm still struggling with. So